I was intrigued by the emergency, so to say.
Yeah, so I just have to breathe for a minute because I've been running around like a crazy
Sure.
person. I always want to make sure people know where we're at. I love what you said the other day. This isn't a history podcast, this is a healing podcast.
Mm.
I found myself at the top of a rabbit hole
Okay.
that I think is going to be really deep.
Hmm.
And so the reason why I reached out midweek is because I think it's important enough that we talk about, but I couldn't, and I'll explain all of this because when people start listening, I want them to have a sense of where we're at in the story. But this Sunday, we already kind of had a plan of what we were going to talk about, and I do want to get to that, but I feel like I need to address this first because it pertains to an episode that we recorded a couple of days ago. I am trying to be very transparent about the fact that I am not a historian. I'm not a psychologist. I'm also not a medical doctor, and we're going to get to that today. And I have my biases. I have my own trauma. I have a viewpoint through which I tend to view things out of my own pain, my own hurt, my own defensiveness when it comes to people who have been through difficult things, the same kind of difficult things as me.
Mhm.
I do not claim innocence when it comes to jumping to conclusions because of all of that. Now, I'm saying all of that just to put it on the table. I might still be right in my perspective, but what we're going to talk about today is important enough because it could mean that I'm completely wrong in how I interpreted historical information that I stumbled upon.
Okay.
And parts of both might still be valid. That's why it's really important for us to emphasize. And again, I love how you put it about this being a healing podcast, not a history podcast, because as we do this, I'm going to get things wrong. I'm always happy to be corrected, and I will try to self correct as much as
Mhm.
I can in this process. And I won't ever mind when others maybe write in, email, whatever, say, hey, by the
Mhm.
way, look here, you might have, change your perspective if you have this other information.
Mhm.
I want the whole truth. I want as much accurate information as I can get. So, with that on the table, let me remind listeners kind of where we're at. Last week, we talked about Richard Robinson and the whole Robinson family leaving Nauvoo and all the things that happened. They get to Utah. He leaves a week later and goes in California as a 49er, panning for gold. He was there for 3 years. And we ended last week with him returning to Utah. He gave that amazing gift of a lot of his, do you call them earnings when you've been digging in
Yeah.
a lot of, the gold stepmother. And then he marries the cousin of his step siblings and accepts a call to move to southern Utah. And we kind of left it off with the preview of next week, or, next time that we were going to jump in and talk about Richard Robinson and Elizabeth in southern Utah because the Mountain Meadows Massacre is about to happen. And he lived down in that area just the same as everybody else when all of that was going on. And I was going to explain all of that. But before we even addressed the Robinson family, we started by talking about Mary Ann Eccles and her family coming from England, crossing the plains in the William Martin Handcart companies, all the suffering that happened when she was a little girl, ends up in southern Utah, and then as a 15-year-old is married to Richard Robinson, and that's when the two stories come together, is married to Richard Robinson. Yeah, 15 years old, and I won't hide my bitterness about that because I
Mhm.
feel like that's so predatory
Mhm.
because her father had passed away not that long earlier. And anyway, and they have a lot of children together. He eventually has three wives total.
Real quick, what's the time span between when Richard and his first wife go to southern Utah and when he marries Mary Ann Eccles? What's the time frame?
Yep, that's a great question. So Richard and Elizabeth, his first
Mhm.
wife, moved down there in 1853. Let me take a step back. They accepted the calling in the fall of 1853. When
Mhm.
they actually got down there, it may have already been 1854 after the
Okay.
winter when they got down. I'm not sure, but it was that time frame,
Yeah,
53,
so 53,
54.
54.
Yep. Mountain Meadows Massacre happens in 57, and Mary Ann and her family are down there, but they are not married. They are not, there's no, they're not connected yet. They get married in 1860. So, about 6 or 7 years after he marries Elizabeth, he marries Mary Ann, and the Mountain Meadows Massacre happens about 3 years before he marries Mary Ann. So, that's the time frame.
So just yeah, just so it's clear in my mind, he's still a young man
Yeah.
Right?
So
He's probably 30, around 30, been married to Elizabeth for seven
yeah,
years, and then he takes a 15-year-old as a second wife.
yes.
His first wife is slightly younger than he is.
His first wife, I think she's 5 years younger than him. So not an unreasonable gap, right?
Yeah, a reasonable gap.
Yeah. So she had just turned 18 or was about to turn 18 when they got married, but he was like 22. So that gap was a little more, it was more
Yeah.
reasonable, right?
So his first wife is about 20,
Yes. Mary's a
broaches
15.
the subject with her.
Hmm.
Hey, I'm going to take a 15-year-old as a second wife.
Yeah. And he's around 29, 30 when that happens. I know. I know.
Yeah. All right. So, yeah. So that I don't vomit vitriol and take up the majority of this podcast, please continue the story.
Okay. And then toward the end of Mary Ann's life, let me take a step back. Next week, and depending on how long it takes us, maybe the week after, we will get into those years of Mary Ann and Richard being married. But that first week when we were recording, we didn't cover really any of their marriage, just that they'd gotten married. They did have a lot of children together. And then when she's in her fees, he commits her to an insane asylum. And we had a very long conversation about that. And I don't feel like I really held back in regard to my just complete anger and frustration, disdain, knowing how often that happened with, women, that men would put their wives in asylums back then for unreasonable reasons. And my assumptions may still be true, but I do need to acknowledge that I very much viewed all of that through my biases and feeling very protective of sweet little Mary Ann, is what I like to call her, right? Okay, so now let me tell you what occurred with me this week that made me reach out and be like, can we
Mhm.
please record ASAP before our regular recording time on Sunday?
Yeah.
Okay, so I was just listening to and editing that conversation we had last week about him and the goldfields and kind of talking about, it can be a little bit frustrating, sometimes a lot frustrating, but we try to understand where people are coming from, but we still really feel strongly that people shouldn't whitewash things, but how sometimes stories are told through a very whitewashed perspective, and that the way cousin Dennis in this case had been describing Richard in the goldfields, that he was valiant, he was strong, he was righteous, he never let the reason why he was there, which was maybe to earn money for his family, he never let that, I don't know, slip his mind. He stayed
Mhm.
focused, and he was a very resolute person and never
Yeah. Yeah.
dabbled in the vices, right? The
Yeah.
gambling and the
Right.
prostitutes and all of the
Right.
things, right? And you and I were like, we don't
Mm,
really
who cares?
care. Like, we don't
If
think.
he did,
So, on one, we don't think that he did resist, but our perspective is, but even if he didn't, like that to us doesn't mean he was a bad person. That just means
yeah.
he's human because we don't
Yeah.
view it through the same, I don't know, narrow viewpoint as believing Mormon would. Okay. So that's our starting point right there.
Okay.
I was listening as I was editing to that part, and I was listening to us saying, even if he did, participate in those vices, whatever, who cares, move on. And I found myself thinking, what if he did? And then one single word burst into my brain that I hadn't thought about or considered before, and that word was syphilis. How
Yeah.
much do you know about syphilis, Nate?
Well, not much, but I know that one of its most infamous symptoms is insanity, making people go crazy. So, and it's a long-term thing, right? It doesn't pop up as a symptom within, a few months. It pops up much later in life.
Yeah, so not sure if you thought we were going to be talking about a sexually transmitted disease when we sat down today, but that's what we're going to be talking about. So,
Okay.
like jump on board with me and let me walk
Yeah.
you through, because I'm not coming to this conversation with conclusions.
Yeah.
I'm at the top of this rabbit hole, and I
Mhm.
ventured just far enough down this rabbit hole that I think there is something there. I think there's more digging to do. So, in this conversation, I want to take you to the point where I got myself, and then you and I can explore to whatever
Okay.
point we feel exploring time-wise, all the things. I just felt like I just need to sit down and have a conversation about
Sure.
this because
Sure.
I need to talk it through with somebody.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me walk you through my thought process. So the word syphilis jumps into my brain. I don't know at that moment, I didn't know a lot about syphilis either, but the
Sure.
one thing I didn't know the insanity part. The one thing that popped into my mind that I did know was blindness. That's something that can be caused later
Hmm.
in life. Somebody who
Hmm.
has syphilis is blindness. That doesn't really like Mary Ann's sister Martha. She went blind later in life, but that's her. Like that
Hmm.
was not something that affected Mary Ann. But I thought to myself, like, let's say he did contract syphilis in the mining fields and he gave it to Mary Ann. Because I'm at this point, I am just thinking about Mary Ann, okay? And
Yeah.
we'll get to all the other people in a minute, but I'm just
Yeah.
thinking about Mary Ann. And I'm like, blindness was really the only thing in my brain that I was like
Hmm.
fitted with syphilis, but I thought, I wonder if there's anything else that it
Hmm.
causes.
Hmm.
And so I just went, to good old Google and just with so little education about this, I start Googling and I'm trying to think of, the things that had been listed on the admittance record to the insane asylum.
Right. Right.
And I'm like, I'm Googling it right now on my phone, syphilis and violent action, right? That was one of the things that came up. And what comes up is it can cause psychosis, mania, depression, anxiety, personality changes. And I'm like, okay, okay.
Very general descriptions.
Exactly. So I'm like, okay. And then it also said epilepsy, right? And so I look up epilepsy and immediately says seizures can occur at any stage of neurosyphilis. And then it goes on to like say the percentage. It's like up to 25%, but it's kind of a loose thing. So
Hmm.
about 1 in 4 people do end up with epilepsy. And I'm like, okay, that's
That's
really interesting.
what that's fascinating. Yeah. I mean, I've heard about epilepsy all of my life, ever since I was a little kid. There's movies and
Yeah.
TV shows and such. I've never heard a mention that syphilis and epilepsy have a connection. Okay.
And then I thought, well, I need to just back up and just look up
Hmm.
syphilis. Like, let's
Yeah.
figure syphilis out, right?
Yeah.
And so I start reading through it and find that there are 4 stages. And I am not somebody that ever could have become a doctor. We don't necessarily need to get into every stage, but basically, every stage, it's fairly benign for the first
Mhm.
4 stages. We're talking
Mhm.
about like canker sores on uncomfortable parts of your body, a
Mhm.
rash, things like
Mhm.
that that really, especially in that time period, could have been contributed to so many different
Yeah. Yeah.
scary stage is stage 4.
Okay.
Not everybody who contracts syphilis ends up in stage 4
Hmm.
because the body does fight it and like work. Some people, the syphilis can work its way out of their system.
Okay.
They never end up in stage 4
Hmm.
prior to penicillin, so really the entire 1800s, like there was no cure for this. It was also called, syphilis has one of its nicknames, I guess, in the medical community is the Great Imitator, because
Hmm.
pretty much every single marker for syphilis can be attributed to something else.
Okay.
So
Hmm.
without like an like a complete medical screening, it's difficult to pinpoint all of the different system or symptoms to syphilis specifically. Now today
Um,
that's much easier. Like there are tests, like
yeah.
we can test it, but back then it was very easy to overlook syphilis as being the problem or being what was causing the other problems. And there was no
Well,
cure at that point in state.
yeah.
There's no cure back then.
And I can imagine that plenty of doctors and patients were motivated not to conclude that it was syphilis, simply because of the moralizing that would accompany it.
So, yes, and the stigma.
Hmm.
And one of the side rabbit holes I ended up going down in the last couple of days was the ways in which women during that time period were denied information about their own health to
Hmm.
protect their husbands' indiscretions.
Yeah. Right.
And so
Right.
women would have all these medical problems and they were never told that it was syphilis,
Yeah.
even if the doctor knew, because the doctor would protect reputation because
Right.
he
But
was the one paying the bill.
yeah. Right. And because patriarchy, what patriarchy?
Yeah, what are we talking about? Yeah, that doesn't exist. I know. So that was,
Let's just pause for a second. Let's just frame this for what it is. She, and the she actually is they, were not told about what their future could be.
Yep.
and how awful their future could be, all to save the husband's reputation.
We're talking about insanity.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Also, that he doesn't have to be made uncomfortable admitting what he did.
Yep.
How's that for par for the course? Yeah,
It's so angry.
yeah. All right.
So then I'm like, okay, let's just learn, talking to myself. I just want to learn about syphilis itself rather than trying to connect Mary Ann because there's just
Sure.
a few little words, right?
Yeah.
I just wanted to because that word popped into my brain out of nowhere. I mean, this could just be confirmation bias. This could be, there's right? Like I'm talking myself out of this while I'm finding information.
I would be super curious if anyone could give information about frequency, right? Like
I
1800s, North America, what do historians of medicine estimate was the frequency of the sexually transmitted infections?
I do have a little of information about that.
Okay. Like if syphilis is at the top of that list somewhere, well, then it's a reasonable thing to pop into your mind.
Yeah,
Right.
and the information that I was able to find, it depends upon what part of the century we're talking about, so it's a
Mhm.
little bit loose, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But anywhere between 1 in 20 and 1 in 10 people had syphilis.
Of total populations.
Well, that's what's hard because how many cases were never diagnosed and
Yeah.
detected?
Yeah.
I mean, these are just the estimates from historians as they look at information. And yeah, the data that was actually recorded at that time and then some guesstimates from what historians now understand, right?
Mhm.
So it's fuzzy, but that it was
Yeah.
approximately,
Even 1 in 20 seems like a massive number.
yeah. Yeah. So, but I wasn't done with the rabbit hole and I'm still trying to like find something conclusive to convince me that it's not.
Sure. Yeah.
So I'm at this point, I'm just looking up syphilis and I'm reading about stage 4. Stage 4 is sometimes called neurosyphilis, but I don't know, the acronym, the term, another term they use is general paralysis of the insane, is what they called it back then. I don't know if they
Okay.
have a more modern, because insane is a
Yeah.
term that we don't really,
Pretty outmoded nowadays.
yeah,
Yeah.
not specific enough, and it's been weaponized in a lot of ways
Yeah.
against,
Yeah.
populations. But anyway, so GPI is what it was kind of referred to. The stage 4 of syphilis was referred to as GPI,
Yeah.
general
Okay.
paralysis of the insane, okay? So this is what I'm on a medical website here. So general paralysis of the insane, also known as neurosyphilis, was a common cause of admission to mental asylums before antibiotics were available.
Mm.
GPI is a severe neuropsychiatric disorder that can develop from untreated syphilis. It was a major reason for psychiatric hospitalization, and many people died in asylums after having been admitted with GPI. And it doesn't say this right here, but I read somewhere else about how because it was the great imitator, oftentimes they didn't automatically pinpoint syphilis, but if somebody had like symptoms of, what they would have called insanity, they would have just said, oh, that person is insane
Yeah.
and treated them accordingly, or that person has epilepsy and treated them accordingly. So, I mean, that's that. And then elsewhere, I was looking up other symptoms, like how severe, what does that look like? And it says here that hallucinations can be a symptom of syphilis, particularly
Mm.
in the early stages of neurosyphilis, that
Mhm.
stage 4. Hallucinations can be auditory or visual and can be accompanied by other psychiatric symptoms like paranoia, mania, and cognitive impairment. Other symptoms include personality changes, delusions, delirium, and mood changes. And for patients over the age of 45, and this is even still current, like to today, patients over 45 who present with psychosis are often misdiagnosed with schizophrenia, but it's not. It's
Mhm.
syphilis. And in a couple of places, I saw that dementia kept being mentioned as one of the symptoms
Mhm.
of neurosyphilis. And so then I was like, okay, I don't really know a lot about dementia. What about dementia and violent action? And so I looked that up, and it says people with dementia can sometimes exhibit violent behavior. which is often a result of their cognitive decline, causing them to struggle with communication, frustration, and confusion, leading to physical or verbal aggression as a way to express their distress.
Mm.
Manifest as hitting, pushing, shouting, or threats,
Mm.
particularly when they feel overwhelmed, disoriented, or in pain.
Mm.
Causes of dementia are cognitive decline. As dementia progresses, the brain's ability to process information and control behavior diminishes, leading to impulsive actions. People with dementia may misinterpret their surroundings or interactions, leading to fear or anger. Pain, fatigue, or other physical issues can trigger aggression. And then feeling unable to perform daily tasks and that loss of independence can be frustrating and lead to
Mm.
outbursts, and delusions and hallucinations occur. Some people with dementia experience false beliefs or visions that can cause anxiety and
Mm.
aggression.
Mm.
Signs of potential violence can be agitation, pacing, restlessness, verbal abuse, yelling, swearing, clenched fists, tense body, sudden mood swings, suspiciousness, or paranoia. So I read that, and suddenly that admittance record where we're like, where is this coming from? Like, he's
Yeah.
just saying all these things about her, and I'm like, could it be syphilis? But then, of course, I think to myself, if he gave Mary Ann syphilis, what about Elizabeth? Elizabeth
Yeah.
was on for
Yeah.
7 years. Like, why wouldn't, like, we haven't heard about her having insanity at the end of her
Mhm.
life. Like, what does that even look like? And at
Well,
that point, you go
yeah.
ahead and I'll tell you.
How old was Elizabeth when she died? Because she died before
She did, but yeah, I think she was like 64 when she died. And then Mary Ann died when she was 62, but they were about 10 years
10
apart.
years
So
apart.
Mary Ann lived later, but not longer. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
She was younger when she died, but only by like 2 years.
Yeah.
But she died in 1906 and Elizabeth died in 1899.
Well, I mean, some questions pop into mind. There's a big physical difference. Well, no, except that if Elizabeth had been only about 18 when they got married, then I mean, there is a big difference between 15 and 18. But in terms of how a body would react to an illness, I don't know if that's a big enough difference.
I don't think so either, but something I read, like I mentioned earlier, is that not everyone enters into stage 4. Some
Yeah.
people's bodies work out the syphilis over time and then they
Mhm.
don't have it anymore. Some people
Yeah.
never enter stage 4.
It could be, I don't know. Yeah, it could just be like a fortune of genetics,
Yeah,
where Elizabeth just happened to have a genetic disposition that would make her more resilient, like constitutionally or something. I mean, I'm just totally supposing here.
yeah, same.
But I mean, it's not safe to assume that both women would react to the same illness in the same way. That's
Yeah.
just not, I mean, that's not a reasonable thing to think. So it's not reasonable to say, well, Elizabeth showed no symptoms, so therefore we can rule it out for Mary Ann. We can't.
We can't. But then, and you are right in line with my thought process, and what I remembered, I think Elizabeth had some children who died, but so did Mary Ann. Then I remembered. These are thoughts and memories that are coming out of the recesses of my brain. Then I remembered where I learned anything about syphilis. And where that was an episode of Who Do You Think You Are, which do you know what that show is?
I've seen a few episodes. Yeah. Yeah, it's a good show.
Yeah, I love it. It was an episode of Who Do You Think You Are? And I even remembered who it was. It's the actor Martin Freeman.
Yep. Hmm.
You know who he is?
Yep. Sure.
When he dug into his family history, they were able to determine that his family back then probably suffered some serious health issues because of syphilis. So I'm like, okay, I gotta go find this.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna pull that up and share my screen, and I want you to watch a clip with me because that was where I even learned about
Mhm.
syphilis causing blindness because his great grandparents were blind. Just great grandparents, like not very far back, just great
Mhm.
grandparents were both blind, and he never knew that. And he's like, wow.
Mhm.
So he learns all about them and what they did. They were both musicians, and his great grandfather went to a school for the blind. And it was just like, he's in England, of course, and he was just
Mhm.
like, fascinating. I never knew that my great grandparents were blind. And then, okay, let me find it. Sorry. found the, okay, perfect. Found the,
Martin has
oh,
ordered
hold
his
on.
grand.
Can you hear that?
I can hear it, yeah.
But I'm going to share my screen, so give me a minute. And just because I don't want you to hear this while I'm finding it, I'm going to put myself on mute for just a
Sure.
second. So give me a second. Let me share my screen. And you and I are going to watch this clip, and then we'll just explain to everybody afterwards what we just saw. Okay. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what has happened to this point? He started by learning about his grandfather who died at Dunkirk. And once he learned about that, it was like a really cool, meaningful story. He wants to know about his parents. And these are the Freemans, his father's grandparents. And he learns about his great-grandfather was blind, and now he's learning about his great-grandmother. She was blind, and he sees they had like 6 kids together. He had some kids from his first marriage, and one of them is still living with them. So they have like 7 kids in the house. And Martin Freeman is looking at this document, and he sees that it lists the number of children living with the family, and it lists the number of children born to the couple. And the number of children that was living with this couple was 6. They weren't counting the older one at that moment, 6 kids, but the number of children born to the couple was 12.
Wow.
And he's like, what happened to all those kids? And at this point, he has no clue about,
Yeah.
like, he just thinks his great grandparents were blind. He has no clue about anything.
She's a music teacher as well, and she's blind. How interesting. And two sons. Philip and Richard was born in Hull. So I'm now getting up the 1911 census. 10 years on from the last one. What have we got here? So they got Philip from before, Richard, Mabel, who's 3, Ada, who's 2, Leonard, my grandfather, who's 1, and Hilda, who's 6 months. There's a lot of Freemans, you know, from Richard. I'm genuine, I'm not being glib. I've actually lost count of his children now.
The census also reveals something else about Richard and Ada's children.
It says children born alive to present marriage. They've got 12 as the answer to that. 12 children born alive. Yeah, so they've lost 6 children. 6 children have died. That's horrendous.
His relative that he meets, this relative that he hadn't known before, doesn't know why so many children died. He's like, yeah, it's just one of those things. And so the show coordinators send him to see a doctor. So this is when we start learning about other things.
With those, I'm going to speak to a doctor now.
Martin's come to Great Ormond Street Children's Hospital to meet paediatric consultant Dr. Vaz Novelli to find out why by 1911, 6 of Ada and Richard's 12 children had died.
Some certificates here. We've managed to track down 4 of them. These are them chronologically.
Right. But if the mortality rate around that time would be around 15-20%, I would expect 1 in 5 to 1 in 6 children die, not 50%.
Yeah.
So that is unusual.
So this is Alice.
This is the first one that was died.
This is the first one that died, apparently, yeah.
So that was 902 and aged 2 months.
Yeah.
Right. And with the cause of death, inanition and syncope. I mean, inanition is not a term we tend to use today. No. It basically means failure to thrive. So that was the first one, and then
That's
you've got.
Then this is Hilda.
He died in 1904.
I don't know what that says.
So that just says premature birth. This is the third
this
one.
Here is Donald Walter.
That's marasmus. That's just the same as inanition in a way. It means lack of, basically, a child who's not thriving, who's losing weight as such. So this is the fourth one.
Well, this is Arthur.
Right, so he was
3 hours.
3 hours. And it's also inanition. And, you know, I think putting the 4 together, looking at these, you know, I think there's an underlying process which led to these infants not thriving and not being able to suckle properly and not putting weight on and dying in those first couple of months. So then you say, well, what could be the cause of this? Congenital abnormalities, cardiac defects, renal defects. You wouldn't expect 4 in a row or 5 in a row to have that. Could it be genetic, metabolic? Possibly. You'd expect a 1 in 4 involvement in that situation. This doesn't appear to be cholera. They would have recognised that. The other common infections would be whooping cough. They'd recognise that. Measles, they'd recognise that. Diphtheria, upper airways obstruction with diphtheria, they'd recognise that. The sort of infections that would be more difficult to pick up would be something like tuberculosis. It looks like your great-grandma seemed to be pretty good, Nick. So she doesn't sound like she had consumption. One other thing that probably needs to be considered would be something like syphilis. Congenital syphilis. Congenital syphilis is very, very common in this area. I think that's a possibility. I mean, I think I've seen congenital syphilis about 2 cases in the last 5 years. It's very, very unusual. I'm not the best expert in that area. I think the best person for you to talk to next would be a sexual health expert.
Really? Okay. Now, I'm pretty sure that syphilis played a part in it. Of course, I'm curious about that. It's more surprising when you've been finding out very family stuff about these people, especially about Ada. In fact, she was this strong, called, very upright, talented woman who outlived everybody. Again, I'm not a doctor. I don't know if you can have syphilis and live that long. I don't know. And not show symptoms of it. That maybe you just pass the symptoms on to children, but why didn't she pass them on to the ones that survived, and how did she live to be 90-odd in really good health?
Martin's on his way to the Royal Society of Medicine.
I just think there's too many deaths here to put it down to, it's just the olden days, infant mortality. The percentage of the children they lost is way higher than the average of the time. And also, as Dr. Novelli said, it's very rare to have that many deaths and then that many children who live.
Martin's meeting Peter Greenhouse, a member of the British Association for Sexual Health and HIV, who's been doing some research into Richard and Ada's case.
Right.
Cheers.
Well, we've got some interesting stuff for you here.
Great.
You've actually got the list of the family here.
Yeah.
And the general rule is that wherever you see a big gap
Yes.
in a family, you have to think that it might be syphilis.
Really?
When there's a big gap.
Jeez,
Let's have a look through. You've got a live and healthy chap.
Yep.
So he's okay.
He's okay.
He's okay. And then you've lost 1, 2, 3, 4 that you know about. Yes. And possibly 2 other children, all of them early deaths.
Yes.
All of them early deaths. And your first healthy child is here. So what's the gap? We're looking at a gap of 8 years.
Yes.
So you've got 8 years here, and then a whole lot of reasonably healthy children.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that very much looks like it could be syphilis. There's hardly anything else that would explain that. And it's explained by a thing called Kassavitz's law, which was described in 18th law. Spontaneous, gradual diminution in intensity of syphilitic transmission. So basically, you tend to get a number of children who just don't get miscarriages. Yeah. You then have stillbirths. You then have unhealthy children who die quickly. Then unhealthy children who live. And then completely healthy children.
Really? So it kind of gets itself out of its system?
Eventually, yes. It takes about 4 to 6 years, and it's a long time.
Well, let me ask an absolute bottom line layman's question.
John, then.
What is syphilis, and how exactly do you get it?
Okay. Syphilis is a sexually transmitted infection. It's a bug that you get you pass on when you have sex. Most people who had syphilis didn't realise it and passed it on unknowingly.
The first recorded cases of syphilis were in southern Europe in the 1490s. It rapidly spread across the continent, ravaging cities and ports for over 400 years. With its devastating symptoms, its sexual means of transmission, and its extreme contagiousness, it became the most feared disease since the plague. It wasn't until the early 20th century and the arrival of penicillin that a cure was finally discovered.
So what would some of the symptoms of syphilis have been then?
Well, some of those, they might have been very obvious. Here's a picture, for instance, and this is the so-called exanthema, or the pustular rash over the face. This is from a German textbook of the time, about the same sort of time that Ada was having her children. That's fairly not very nice. Now, the other major thing that syphilis does is to cause blindness. So quite a lot of people who were born with syphilis went blind 5, 6, 7, 8 years later. And it causes a clouding over of the cornea.
Right.
And these are the pictures that we have here of blindness.
Right, okay. So that may answer my next question, which was going to be the fact that Ada was blind, but as we understand, she became blind at about 3 years old. Could that have been syphilis or not?
That could have been syphilis, and we've been doing a little bit of work on it. We found this.
Right. Oh, right. It's her birth certificate. Okay. So Ada's born 1st of November 1870.
That doesn't tell us very much, but I have to say we found something else.
Okay. This is a death
certificate from January 1872.
And Of Arthur Stanley
Meldrum.
Meldrum. Oh, I see. Oh, I see. So this is her brother.
This is her elder brother.
Right. So he died at 3 months.
Yep.
Syphilis.
Yep.
Christ. Congenitals. That's
No, that's just
constitutional.
Constitutional syphilis.
Which means
Which means that the syphilis that he had was so obvious that they couldn't miss it. It must have been blatantly obvious. So if Arthur died in January, and Ada was born in November, she must have been conceived at just after Arthur died. Which means that there's a very strong chance that she might have had syphilis. She might have been born with syphilis, lived with it, not apart from perhaps the blindness, been seriously harmed by it.
So clarify for me then. It looks like he could have been born with syphilis.
Yep.
It works itself out.
That's right.
But then she can catch it again.
Yeah, just because you've had it before doesn't mean to say you can't catch it again. For this to happen, she must have caught it from Richard.
So she would have had syphilis twice in her life. Once she was born with it and once when she was infected with it.
Sadly. How long did she live?
Till about 90.
Well, she had a pretty good innings then.
Yeah, very good innings.
At the time that this family were around, 100 years ago, about 1 in 10 people in Britain had syphilis. And you could almost say that if 10% of people had syphilis, then 10% of people doing genealogy searches have a sporting chance of finding it somewhere in their family tree. So you're not the only one.
Okay, well, let me stop sharing my screen. I actually think he's wrong about that math. Because out of 10 people at the time had syphilis, so 1 out of 10 people today, we don't all have one line of ancestry.
Sure.
I actually think it's likely that everyone will at some point run into somebody who had syphilis. That's how the math works out, but that's beside the point. Okay, so first, I mean, I have so many thoughts, but first tell me your thoughts, any questions, any like whatever, and then I'm going to take you somewhere and we're going to talk about the children. We're going to really look at the children born to Richard. Okay.
Well, that's exactly what it makes me think of. I mean, the description of the Freemans and the observation of symptoms, the frequency. It seems like his family, his ancestors really fit the pattern almost perfectly, right? Where you've got, where they said a series of stillborns and then a series of sickly children who die shortly and then sickly children who live and then children who live. I'm super curious now to see how that pattern plays out.
Right.
So
and go ahead.
In both of those, of the wives that we have, that we're talking about.
And something to keep in mind is that it exhibits itself differently in everyone. So not everything fits everyone. But I did want to say really fast, just in case I need to cut out that entire video, maybe let's just do a quick recap for listeners. So we just watched a clip from Who Do You Think You Are for Martin Freeman, the actor. I suggest go watch it. It's very fascinating. Talks about a war hero ancestor and then how he had ancestors that were blind and potentially was caused by syphilis. That is where my brain went as I was thinking, because I'd seen that and I'm, I just those random things. But what the doctor explained to Martin Freeman was that when a couple has a lot of children and there are 3 or 4 in a row who die,
are stillborn.
Well, not all of them have to be stillborn, but they die, but they fail to thrive. One of those kids died within 3 hours, but a couple others died at 6 months, so they don't have to be born stillborn.
Well, that was the pattern. And obviously not every family fits the pattern, but the pattern he described was a series of stillborns, then a series of born but die shortly after.
Yes, thank you for the clarity.
So,
born and live, but they're unhealthy and they die at 12 and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So I remembered that they talked about children dying in that episode. So I went back to watch to remind myself, and there's no way I could have remembered all that technical medical stuff that he explained, and it was such good information for me. So then of course I go to Richard's family tree and I'm like, we need to look, so give me 2 seconds. Let me pull up his family tree and then I will share my screen. Share. Can you see that? Okay. So this is Richard Smith Robinson, and we're going to scroll down and take a look, because if our theory is correct that he contracted syphilis in the minefields, he would have given it to each of his wives, right? So this is Elizabeth, his first wife. Richard is here, Elizabeth is here, and then you scroll down and there's Richard Robinson, born in 1854, died in 1913, so he lived. Elizabeth, born in 1856, died in 1910, so she lived. Edward, born in 1857, died in 1858, so he did not live. Okay, interesting.
So he lived a year or less.
Yeah, so I'm gonna click on him and then we'll go back. Um, let's find birth and death. Okay, born December 57, died December 58. So he lived
He lived
just
1 year.
over a year. And then what I always like to do when I find those things is look at memories to see, is there a death certificate? Is there any information? And all they have is this little story under Richard. And it just talks about the fact that he was born to them. And here at the end it says Edward, and this is Richard Smith Robinson's third child, Edward. Edward had just celebrated his first birthday. Let me say that again. Edward had just celebrated his first birthday when he passed away. There is no indication as to why, but little Edward G is buried in the Pinto Cemetery. Okay, like
1857. That's not, yeah, there's nothing shocking about that.
no, it's like, okay, he born in 57, died in 58.
Mhm.
Okay, that's interesting information. Let's go back. So then you look at the next one after Edward, and John Robinson, 1859 to 1904. So he lived. Jane Robinson, 1861 to 1861. So she died. So then I'm like, okay, I want to look at her.
Like about a year again.
February of 61 to December
No,
60.
less than a year.
Less than a year, about 10 months. And so, of course, I come here to memories because I want to see what I can find. There's her headstone. Click on this little story. And it says kind of the same thing as with her brother Edward. Emma Jane did not live very long. She passed away at 10 months old. She is buried in the Pinto Cemetery. There is no explanation as to why she passed away. Okay, that's interesting, but there was a living baby between, so that's not really following that pattern, right? So then I went back.
Well, again, referencing the chart that they showed in the episode, there was that long span of infant deaths in the middle, but before that span of deaths, there were a couple of children who survived, then a death, then another child who survived, then another death.
Right.
Again, it's not outside the realm of possibility.
Of possibility, exactly. So scrolling down, the next.
I happen to notice just one more. So Emma lived less than a year, and William lived 2 years or less.
Right. So from December of 63 to January of 65, so it was just over a year.
Just over a year. So again, we've got
13 months.
All of these kids living for approximately a year.
And they all have this little thing that says William, he passed away. There's no information as to why he passed away. So that's, kind of the theme that whomever contributed like these little write-ups, they're like, we can't find anything. So it's like,
which of course my pattern-seeking brain wants to make something of this, but there's actually, 1860s, maybe something was listed on a death certificate. Maybe no death certificate was ever filled out.
And I did go and look because I like pulling those certificates, death and birth certificates. They weren't required before 1904, and it depended on the county in Utah that you came from. And there's plenty of people you can find their birth and death certificates, say from like Salt Lake County, maybe Utah County, like the more populated counties up in the, central to north central part of Utah. We're talking about Kane County, Iron County. Well, actually, this is Iron County. We're talking about Iron County, which is now Washington County, Utah, way down south. At this time frame, there really weren't like the same kind of birth and death certificates as that we would identify today. I doubt they exist. So, and we don't have to go through every one of these because the rest do live. Armita, George, Oscar, Mary Ellen, Sarah, and Martha, they all live. And so I'm like, well, that 4 to 6 years that he talked about working through, I'm not sure. And so I'm just thinking through.
Yeah.
And then I scrolled down to, of course, Mary Ann, because she was the next. And I'm like, oh, yeah, her first baby died. That's
Hmm.
right. Interesting. And so, like, I clicked on her, and she lived from May of 61 to March of 62. So it's like, that was under a year. I was curious. She was born in 61, and I was curious about the births of these other babies that would have been around the same time. And
Yeah.
Emma was born in 61 also. Richard had two children born the same year, one
The
to
two
each,
girls died in the same year.
and they both died in the same year. They both did not live. And I'm
Yeah.
like, oh,
How,
interesting.
I'm sorry, how old was Mary Ann when she gave birth to her first child?
She married at 15.
Yeah.
She was 16. She had a
Well,
baby 9 months later, basically.
you almost certainly know more about this than I do. I seem to recall an assertion that teenagers who become pregnant have a higher chance of losing the child than when a woman is when she's in her 20s.
Yeah, and I don't know the statistics and I couldn't say why, and I don't know if at 15 she would have been considered young enough for that to apply because that definitely applies, say, in the I remember learning about one of the queens that got married in the medieval era and they married her off like at 12. It was
Yeah.
a family dynasty thing, and
Yeah. Yeah.
the understanding back then was that the marriage wouldn't be consummated till she was older, but
But of course, yeah.
she got pregnant like
Yeah.
almost right away and did have a baby. And I remember in this history that I was reading or watching, I can't remember, but that particular baby was very sickly their whole life. And they talked about how that was not uncommon.
Yeah.
Now, saying 15, I was very developed as a 15-year-old. Some 15-year-olds barely are getting their period.
Oh,
They
sure.
go through
Yeah,
puberty
sure.
very late, and so it just
Mhm.
depends upon the
Yeah.
person. But you're not wrong. So it could be that, but
Mhm.
it is interesting that this baby born in 61 to Mary Ann is the same time frame that all of
Mhm.
Elizabeth's babies are dying, right?
Yeah.
And then the rest of Mary Ann's babies live until 86, and he lived from, July 86 to September 87, so just over a year.
Yeah.
Um, and when we're talking about, so when Richard admitted her to the asylum 1901, and he said that she'd been struggling for 25 years, I was trying to kind of like backtrack and, when all of this was happening. Again, I literally know nothing. I'm just trying to put pieces together,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But that pattern of like four babies in a row or whatever really wasn't clicking for me. And then Mary Kate, I already knew this about his third wife. She gives birth to Joseph Eldridge Robinson, who lives, and there's a whole story about him that I'm going to get to another time. But she dies the next year. Like she did not live long after her only baby was born. And he was actually raised by his grandparents, the Eldridges, but was definitely still part of the Robinson family. He was still very involved, but he was a baby and his mother had died. And it's interesting that one of the other moms didn't raise him, but now that I'm learning these things about like Mary's mental health and things like that,
Hmm.
maybe Mary Kate's parents were like, yeah, we'll help you out with him kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And so I
Yeah.
don't know. I don't know any of that, but Mary Kate, her like posterity doesn't really factor into any of this. I just wanted to
Mhm.
touch on that in case that was a
Sure. Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
But let me tell you where I stumbled upon a little more information that solidifies my suspicion, okay?
Right, because everything we've discussed so far kind of hints at a possibility that syphilis was, in the background.
But
But yeah, it's not a slam dunk.
it's like could be.
It could be.
And so I was looking at these babies of Elizabeth that had died because, she didn't have four in a row, but she did have one and then
Hmm.
two.
Hmm.
And I was like, interesting, this John, he was right smack in the middle of these kiddos that all
Yeah.
of them died. So I was just curious about him and I clicked on him and what came up was an obituary.
Hmm.
And it says Kanab man takes suicidal route to other world. And then it says his mind was unbalanced. Condition the result of epilepsy, leaves wife and 5 children. And so then the actual article says John Robinson, a resident of this place who has been subject to epileptic fits for some years, committed suicide this morning shortly after 3 o'clock by cutting his throat with a razor.
Ugh.
Right?
That is the theme
Right?
with
Like
this.
family. This is Mary Smith's grandson. Okay, let me take a step back.
And did they have to go into the detail?
Oh, they do. Maybe you've looked down already, and I'm going to read all of that.
Yeah.
But
Good.
yeah, so this is Mary Smith's grandson. This pretty much was the moment I messaged you.
Yeah.
I'm like, I need somebody to talk through this with me. So I'll keep reading. You know, he committed suicide this morning shortly after 3 o'clock by cutting his throat with a razor while in a state of delirium. He lived only a few minutes, the jugular artery and windpipe being severed. They go into it, and they're not done. The unfortunate man, who was about 40 years of age, married and having a family of 5 children, was taken with spasms last Thursday and never regained the use of his faculties. In all, he had some 20 fits. At 3 a.m., he got out of bed and walked into an adjoining room, which was in darkness. His attendant, which that's interesting. He had an attendant apparently. His attendant picked up the lamp and followed him in a few seconds and arrived on the scene just in time to see him execute the deadly stroke. And then the last few things it says is during his last illness, the deceased was utterly beside himself. He refused to eat, saying that the food had bugs in it, and he would sing and laugh by turns.
Well, it doesn't say he would. It said had bugs in it and would sing and laugh by turns.
Yeah, I'm assuming they're saying he would sing. Like the bugs would sing? Either way, he's hallucinating.
He's hallucinating, yeah, significantly. That's not a very respectful obituary.
But I sure am glad they included all of
Oh,
that
absolutely. No, I mean,
information.
it has a quite salacious element to it. It's
Family?
done, it's done to get readers, really, which is unfortunate, but historically a boon.
This is a
So,
gold mine. Are you kidding? So the only baby in that span of 4 who survived
they describe symptoms that fit those of syphilis.
of the neurosyphilis, epilepsy, the hallucinations, the insanity. And I'm like, they all had syphilis.
Yeah.
For me, this is the
Linchpin. This is
Yes.
yeah. Well, and of course, I cannot help but wonder about, it's Mary Eccles?
Yeah, who?
Or you said it was his grandmother who.
Yeah, okay,
who-
so I love that you went there because so Mary Ann Eccles, our 3rd great grandmother, who was Richard's 2nd wife, she was put in the insane asylum.
Yeah.
This is not her son, this is Elizabeth's son, but
Right.
one of her
Right.
children's half siblings is this kiddo. Then if you trace back up to Richard's mother,
hmm
she committed suicide.
I really want to understand the details of the connections. Okay, so in the previous episode, we talked about the wife who we suspected might have been blood atoned.
Yes, Mary
Right.
Smith, Richard's mother.
She's the woman who we believe was sexually assaulted
Yeah,
and a short time later slit her own throat
yeah.
or was blood atoned by someone. So, what's the exact connection between these two people who slit their own throats? What's the connection?
Grandmother and grandson.
And so we're talking about
Richard's
all
mother,
of the normal blood ties, all of the normal genetic ties.
Richard's mother, and Richard's son.
Okay. So what I'm thinking is that when she was sexually assaulted, that might have been the moment that she contracted syphilis.
Yes, but neurosyphilis takes about 10 years, 10 years at the least to clear. The first 4 stages of syphilis are very benign. They're like canker sores, they're rashes.
Right.
It's but
And Richard was already born.
Richard was already born.
In that case, well, yeah, so what would seem like the obvious connection isn't a connection then.
Right. And the other thought I had, though, was that, well, a lot of people had syphilis. They didn't
Hmm.
have to contract it in the same way. And so that's when I went back and I wanted to see, look at Mary Smith because I wanted to see her children because I
Hmm.
remembered she had several children in a row that died, remember?
Yeah.
Mary Robinson, 35 to 35,
Yeah. And
September
Margaret. Uh-huh.
35, and it said died in 35, but there's only like 3 months there that the baby could have died. There's no month, three
Hmm.
months old, we can assume.
Yeah.
And then Margaret, March of 37 to November of 36.
Remember.
Could that have been? But again, their next child, Edward lives, William lives. He's the baby that was blessed. I thought William was after the two that died. I guess Edward was in between. And her youngest baby died, Joseph,
Hmm.
at 2 years, September 44 to February 46. So 18 months, not quite 18 months, or sorry, 17 months it looks like.
Hmm.
But I mean that was absolute chaos, right? That's when everybody was leaving Nauvoo, and there could
Yeah.
have been 1,000 things that he died of.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, one infant death isn't suspicious, especially for this time. Two in a row starts to become suspicious.
Yeah. And so then I kind of looked around because I was curious because another thing that that is a result of syphilis that can cause death during that last stage is heart conditions because it can affect the brain, it can affect the
Mm,
heart, it can affect the
mm,
eyes. And so, somebody might in neurosyphilis end up with all of those things, like really unfortunate, but not the syphilis does not affect everybody's organs the same. That's why,
right,
like Martin
right.
Freeman's grandparents both were blind, but they didn't talk about them having heart conditions. There was no
Yeah,
insanity. It
yeah.
sounds like Mary Ann Eccles, she wasn't blind, but
Hmm.
it sounds like she went insane.
Hmm.
And so this is the point where I started just randomly like looking at people, and I won't click on every single thing. John, if you look at the dates here, John Robinson, Richard's brother, just younger than him, he was only in his like a little over 50 when he died.
Hmm.
And I looked and he died of a heart attack suddenly, which could be syphilis, but
Yeah,
it could just be a heart attack,
could just be a heart attack.
right? And so that's when I really like I started looking at all the different things, but ultimately what I was really curious about was Elizabeth just in regard to her like
Hmm.
health. Like what did that look like for her in regard to her health during those years? And I'm gonna need a second to find exactly which one talked about her condition when she died. Let's see. This is one of those where it's all the good stuff. I think maybe this one. Let's try this one. Okay, not that. I looked through all of these, so just give me a second. Actually, I wonder if the one I'm thinking of was not in Elizabeth's, it's in Mary Ann's, and it mentions Elizabeth. So this, yeah, this is going to take us into a tangent thing that I don't want that. That I will mention here in a minute. Okay. So toward the end of this, it says, give me a second, let me see if I can find it. Let me read through this. This might not be exactly, but let me read through. I'll just read through it out loud. It just talks about how the two women, because the other wife died young. She was only like 20. It was really sad. But the other wife died, and so Mary Ann and Elizabeth were the sister wives of this family. Together, these two wives suffered the hardships of frontier life night after night at Pinto, and then later when they moved to Kanab. They worked until midnight by candlelight, busily patching, darning, sewing, or running the spindle wheel for clothing for their family. And it says, one day Aunt Maud, I'm not quite sure who she is, went with her mother to visit the Robinsons. They visited with Elizabeth while she sewed for a while, then went to visit with Mary Ann, who was doing the family wash with terribly burned hands. The tears were streaming down her face. The pain was so intense. Then it says there was the usual polygamy setup in their home, with the first wife being favored. Mary Ann didn't receive much attention, and when she needed anything, she always had to ask for it. If it was flour for bread, she was given just enough sieves to make a batch. If she needed sugar, only a cup at a time was given her. And this completely changed my perspective on her relationship with Elizabeth. I had like jumped to some conclusions about, well, Elizabeth helped her give birth to all of her children, and that I was hoping she had a friend in Elizabeth. This is abuse. Like, this is abuse. Like, Mary Ann, anytime she needed flour, like, she'd have to go ask for it. So that, for me, just like broke my heart.
Yeah.
So one time she asked Wilford, not sure who that is, maybe a child or somebody, to go buy her a bag of tea and please not tell anyone. She hid it carefully in the cupboard, and he remembered how very much she enjoyed her cup of tea each day.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it just broke my heart.
If she had to hide having a cup of tea every day.
Yeah. Something of her own. It just devastated me because I was like hoping that maybe she had a friend in Elizabeth, and this made me think, no, Elizabeth, I think, just took her power from her husband where she could.
Yeah.
Anyway, so then this goes into exactly what that other history says, where those that remember Mary Ann through her married life say she was very retiring, never demanding, frail and thin. Female trouble caused her health to break to the extent her children could not care for her, so she was taken to Provo because there was no old folks home.
That's such a, the phrase female trouble is such an obfuscating phrase, right? It seems like an obvious avoidance
It's a
of,
whitewash.
yeah.
And even if they didn't know it was syphilis, which I don't think that they necessarily would have,
Yeah.
her mental health was severely struggling. She had
Yeah.
epilepsy, but they don't say that.
Yeah.
First time we hear epilepsy is in Richard's document, and I will say I did end up finding, sorry, I shouldn't have done that. I need Mary Ann's death certificate. It's here, and it tells us how she died, and that tells me Richard wasn't lying. Chief cause, status epilepticus. And what that means is a seizure that begins and never ends, and they die.
And that happened at the institution.
It happened 4 years after Richard died, and this is written down by a physician.
By a physician.
So that verifies epilepsy.
Well, and it also suggests that if the man who put her in the institution has already died, then there's not much reason to think that the physician who made the certificate would have been under pressure to write anything down.
Richard had been dead for 4 years. So this is what I say when I this is a healing podcast, not a history podcast. I am coming at this as just a lay person, just completely. Yeah. I'm just trying to figure things out. I very quickly, well, I don't know very quickly, but it was easy for me to jump to conclusions because I didn't have all of this information and say, Richard, this sounds like you're lying about Mary Ann. Like, I was still so angry that he'd married her when she was 15, and here she is in an insane asylum. I'm thinking he put her away because he didn't want to deal with her. And
well, I mean, discovering this information doesn't make that conclusion impossible. I mean, I'm sure he didn't want to deal with her.
And especially when we read that other little snippet about, like, when she wanted to make bread for her family. And you have to go ask for flour, and they give her just enough to make the bread that she's about to make, and just enough sugar to do. Yeah, she was not treated well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that part, I still believe strongly she was very mistreated. But now it seems like Elizabeth likely was mistreating her as well. Because Richard wouldn't have been around for all of that. You know what I mean? It would have been Elizabeth that was in charge of that type of thing.
Yeah, and the first wife, following that, I don't know, that social norm, I guess, first wives were the matriarchs of the home, right?
Yep.
They ruled everything.
Yep.
Yeah, it sounds like that girl had an awful life from 15 until she died.
Her sister died when she was, 6 or 7? Then she gets caught in the Willie Martin Handcart Company when she's like 11.
Oh, yeah.
And then she moves to Southern Utah and is married at 15. Her first baby dies maybe, because of syphilis. And then syphilis is eating away at her body for the rest of her life. Goes insane. She gets epilepsy. She has dementia, which means she can't understand things. She's confused all the time.
Well, and let's add on the top of that, the fact that, well, not the fact, the notion that any discussion of any of this would have been obscured by Mormon notions of, what is appropriate to talk about.
And that we can't argue with God's plan for us.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's all of that is, intertwined. So certainly, the patriarch of the family could not bear any fault.
No.
And so, even if a physician had been consulted and a physician, said to her, "You're exhibiting all, symptoms of syphilis," and she very likely, would have known that it was not any fault of her own that she had syphilis.
She has only ever had sex with Richard.
Yeah, I mean, unless
She was
some other
born with
history
it.
that we don't know about,
Yeah.
anything, blah, blah, blah.
Yes, but
Yeah.
I mean, she could also have been born with it,
Yeah.
but and that is another thing that I considered because there was a huge gap. Mary Ann's mother, Alice, had three girls in a row,
Hmm.
and she didn't have another child for 10 years. So did
Yeah.
she miscarry for 10 years?
Yeah.
I was like, huh. And then Mary Ann's sister Martha does go blind
Mm.
later in life. And so then I'm like, so at this point, honestly, I am like, did they all have syphilis? You know what I mean? And listen, they could have. That's
They
the
could
thing.
have.
So I don't feel like there's enough information to say that it was absolutely, because I started with Richard, with prostitutes in California during the gold rush.
Yeah.
It could have been, but it's not impossible that Mary Ann and Martha were born with syphilis if their
Mhm.
mother and father had it, if it was that prominent in England at that time, like because it wasn't
Yeah.
just through sex. Kids could be born with it and then they
Yeah.
had syphilis,
Right. And then they passed it on
passed it on, not knowing
their
what it
marriage
was.
party.
Right. It doesn't matter
Yeah.
how quote unquote chaste you were, you didn't
Yeah.
have sex. You could still have syphilis. You could be born with it.
Mhm.
So, and then the fact that Martha went blind, I'm like, could that have come from them? But then I
Mhm.
was like, okay, so then did Mary Ann give it to Richard, who then gave it to Elizabeth? But Elizabeth's first few babies were dying before
Mhm.
Mary Ann
Yeah.
joined the family.
Yeah.
So I don't
Mhm.
think it was
Yeah.
from that. Well, let's go look. I want to make sure that I'm correct on that. I don't want to make assumptions. So let's go down.
Something to keep in mind, of course, is that, all of this is only circumstantial evidence, right? I mean, in order to strongly support this with evidence, we would need to actually go exhume bones and do tests,
Exactly.
you know.
And in that show, Who Do You Think You Are? The reason why they could say so confidently is because one of the babies died of
Yeah.
syphilis and it was
Yeah.
on the record.
Yeah. No, to
Right.
me, the reason that it is so important to make these suppositions honestly
Hmm.
is because Mormons have such a history of refusing to face the realities of their members, of their culture, of their society. And the way that Mormons, and we can even see this, of course, in Cousin Dennis's, personal history, just how much they paint everything with a chaste brush, where all Mormons are good people to their very core.
They couldn't possibly have
They
had
couldn't
syphilis.
possibly do this sort of thing,
Not
right?
Mormons. Mormons couldn't have syphilis.
The idea that a Mormon patriarch, a true believer, would visit a prostitute and pick up syphilis is simply a lie.
That could
And
never.
anyone who supposes that is under the influence of the devil. But we have no evidence that it's syphilis.
We don't.
But from historical probability, there's good reason to think that this is the explanation.
There's way too many boxes that have been checked.
Yeah, yeah.
Us to
Mhm.
dismiss this as not a very reasonable thing to think
Yeah.
they have been.
Yeah.
Now we don't know, and we do, and I, that integrity, that honesty, because what sometimes happens is, Mormons paint everything. I'm generalizing here, but Mormons tend to paint things or view things through a rose-colored glasses, or tend to whitewash things. And then sometimes what can happen is when people leave the church, ex-Mormons can paint everything as being negative.
Yeah, sure.
I want to make sure that we are honest and have integrity and look at everything through, because there are wonderful things about Mormonism too. And there's not, that is not why I'm doing this to tear.
That's exactly why I made sure to specify that this is just circumstantial,
Yes.
right? We've got
Don't have
no
any
proof
evidence.
of any of this. So, but honest assessments are imperative if you want to really understand where you come from. right? You want to really understand what went on in your background. And, as you have emphasized, you can't understand who you are unless you understand the inherited trauma,
Yep.
that you have picked up. And we both have memories of the past, where explanations for things were given that we felt deeply inside explained nothing, but we were made to feel guilty if we questioned those explanations. And we were told that if you're not willing to see these quote quote truths, then it shows a problem in your worthiness.
You lack faith.
You lack faith.
You're the problem,
Yeah.
not the logic.
Yeah. And this is why it's so important to talk about things as they really were, not as in-group bias would influence us to do, or not as, like making sure that everything is uplifting, right? Anything we talk about has to be uplifting, right? And instead, actually just, with honesty and with resilience, face reality.
Absolutely. Because that's the only way we're able to process and heal.
Yeah.
The truth, or to get as close as we can.
Yeah.
I have like three thoughts. One, the first baby that dies for Elizabeth, and the first baby that dies for Elizabeth was prior to Mary Ann marrying Richard, so we can't. That answers us if our theories are correct. If Richard had syphilis, he didn't get it from Mary Ann.
Yeah.
Originally, because did Mary Ann already? Who knows if she was born with it and already had it? John Robinson, who took his own life at age 40 or whatever, and was hallucinating and seeing bugs in his food and stuff like that. He was born in 59. So my logic says he could very well have been born with syphilis. He didn't die from it, but neurosyphilis, which is the dangerous stage 4, that can happen, 10 years later, 30 years later. It's different in everybody. So that age, if he had been born with it, it's reasonable that is when, if he'd been suffering for 10 years and then 10 years later he's done, he just cannot bear it anymore. And then baby Emma, died. She died the same year that Mary Ann's first baby died. And then Elizabeth had one more baby die, William. So that tells me if Mary Ann did get it from her mother, like if that's why Martha went blind, because they both got it from their parents or their mother, then she's not the one that originally gave it to Richard, because Elizabeth was already losing babies.
Yeah.
That's what my logic tells me.
Yeah.
So that's one. The second thing I was going to say was about the slitting the throat. Like, why in the world did John take his life the same way as his mother?
Yeah.
There's,
as his grandmother.
Thank you. As his grandmother, were all of our suppositions about Mary Smith Robinson, Richard's mother, correct in regard to just her own mental state and all of the awful things that were happening in her mental illness? And was there postpartum depression?
Yeah.
I feel like it's possible for everything that we concluded about her to be accurate, and then have John still take his life that way due to syphilis, because let's be clear, blood atonement and people dying in that way was in the air. And so it's not like he was coming up with that as being a possible way of dying, a very quick, certain way of dying. That is not unreasonable for that. It was just in the air,
Well, it's something that does come to mind, and this is a history that I never fully learned. If we think of the original temple ceremony, where throat slitting is spoken of explicitly in the temple ceremony.
Yes, it sure is.
So, and of course, I have no idea, whether John was really involved in that. I have no idea how, if he went to the temple, any of that stuff. And
unfortunately, I can't even look, because that information isn't available to me anymore. So I can't even say when he went to the temple. But that was in the air. It was part of the temple ceremony. And I do remember somewhere else in that history, Cousin Dennis talks about how when it comes to Mary Smith Robinson and the way she died being known, very split. Like the Southern Utah Robinsons, because they came from Richard, and Richard knew the
Yeah.
truth about his mother.
Yeah.
They were all told how Grandma
I
married.
wondered about that. Yeah.
And then the kids that were younger, that they all hid the information from, they were the Robinsons that stayed up in Utah County. They were the Robinsons that passed on the story that she died in childbirth. There was a very specific divide in who
Yeah.
knew about how she died and who didn't. And
Mhm.
John, being Richard's son, would have known about
Mhm.
how his grandmother had passed away. But the
Yeah.
other thing that I think when it comes to mental illness, if he is, his cognition, his mental capacity is deteriorating, it's not unimaginable, at least how I experience Mormonism, for him to imagine like guilt in
Mhm.
areas of his life that would make him think, I have to die this way.
Yeah.
Like blood atonement and why,
Right.
people do
Right.
that. Now, there are plenty of people throughout history that have died this way, whether by somebody else or through suicide. I mean, it's a thing, but
Yeah.
in Mormonism, it means something very specific. And so
Mhm.
for
Mhm.
me, it's hard to, I mean, could he have just chosen it randomly? Sure, but it's so in the air in
Well,
Mormonism that it's hard for me to think that he chose that outside of knowing about blood
yeah,
atonement.
it's hard to see it as insignificant.
Right.
Yeah.
Especially because of grandma died the same. It's not
Yeah.
funny, but I'm like, it's so not
Yeah.
absurd, but it's just like shocking.
Yeah. Hmm.
It's just, I read that and I was like, shut my computer. I've got a
Hmm.
message, Nate. I'm
Hmm.
gonna go nuts if I don't talk
Hmm.
about this.
Yeah.
So, and then there was one other thing. What was I gonna say? There was a third thought about I just wanted to, in the name of integrity, acknowledge that where my brain went and where my heart went was Richard made all of that stuff up on the admittance record
Mm.
to put Mary Ann away. Now, I don't think she was treated well at home.
Mhm.
I think she was prioritized. I don't think that he would have made the effort to care for her,
Mhm.
but it now looks like the things that he wrote down about her may very well have been completely true.
Well, yeah. Or, yeah, that's certainly a possibility. Even if we view him as a man of less than admirable character, that doesn't mean he was being dishonest about those things.
Yes.
But it's equally likely that he was exaggerating for effect, right?
Sure.
Maybe some of her behaviors were erratic, and maybe she showed, like a violent resistance, right? Like he would command her to do something, and she would shout and, run to her room,
I
and then
know.
he reports that as violent behavior,
Yeah.
right? And so,
Absolutely.
yeah, it's not within, it's not outside the realm of possibility, that he was still bringing some dishonesty into,
The record.
how he described her. So,
Yes. And the other thing that I wanted to say um, had to do with, that whitewashing in regard to, so, and again, I'm not trying to pick on cousin Dennis. It's just he is an example of in this record. That example is there in regard to how he paints Richard and he's upright and he's valiant and he's stalwart and he's righteous and he refrained from all of those vices in
yeah,
the goldfields.
yeah.
If he did indeed contract syphilis there and then bring it with him, and Elizabeth got it, and then Mary Ann got it. This is one of those things where, like, this is a really painful thing in regard to my own Mormonism and the faith that I had in it and what I was taught and what I believed in regard to, the Holy Ghost only being present in people
Hmm.
who were righteous and the power of discernment that priesthood holders held in regard to knowing who was the right person to call. They would only call righteous people to
Yeah.
positions of authority. Richard he was bishop of a couple of different communities down there for most of his life in southern Utah. He was a bishop of whichever congregation he lived in. For a long time it was Pinto. When Mountain Meadows massacre was happening, he was the bishop at Pinto. And next time we chat in a couple days, I will tell you that whole story. But he was bishop. He was bishop of the area where Mary Ann lived when he married her.
Hmm.
And that made me wonder, would she have married him if he hadn't been bishop.
Yeah.
The priesthood authority, he's the bishop of the
The
community.
prestige in the community. Yeah.
Was there a sense of he's the bishop, he's righteous, he will whatever, and he's giving her syphilis because he slept around in the minefields. You know what I mean? Like there's there are things there to consider. Again, we don't know.
Yeah.
We're speculating. I'm just putting different possibilities out
Mhm.
there. But that to me is something that every time I run into that hypocrisy and
Yeah.
it's that deception, and the thing that feels so insidious about it is that there's potential that those that were committing the deception didn't realize the deception, but it's
Mm.
a lie that power of discernment is real in the first place. And
Yeah.
then they have confirmation bias when they do something and it turns out, well, I had the power of discernment and God
Yeah.
guided me.
Yeah.
It's the entire lie of the whole thing.
Yeah. Confirmation bias and it's
Yeah.
the notice the hits, ignore the misses bias, all of those things that
Yep.
allow people to believe that they really did hit the bullseye.
Right.
Yeah.
And would Mary Ann have married him if he hadn't been the
Yeah.
bishop? And if power of discernment was real, would they ever have made him bishop if he had
Right.
been? Again, speculation, all supposition, all guesses.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah. But
healing. This is not history.
well, I mean, yes, it's speculation, it is supposition, but it's also reasonable supposition based on trends, based
Yes.
on observable things, right? And without the influence of, a desire for hagiography, right? Without the desire for, things to be better than they were, right? Or to support a particular notion of who Mormons are. And so, yeah, I mean, going back to Cousin Dennis, excellent writer. It looks like he recorded a lot of history accurately, but there's also a omission to serve a particular purpose or a particular theme, and maybe even deception. Because we don't know if he saw records suggesting that no, in fact, Richard did go to brothels and he
Yeah.
simply didn't include it. We have no way of knowing. Okay, but it is the kind of thing that Mormons would do.
And I'm not assuming that he did that, but you don't have to go that far as in like knowingly be deceptive in order to pass on a story that is harmful because you're making it out to be better than it is.
Yeah,
Rather than saying because, and he doesn't say it this explicitly, but rather than assuming that because he was later a bishop, he must have been righteous in the gold.
yeah,
The more responsible thing is to say whether or not he was following Mormon teachings in the gold fields has nothing to do with whether or not he was called to be a leader later, nothing to do with each other.
yeah,
So to make that assumption.
yeah,
Now, in a Mormon's brain, you can't disconnect them, but that is one of those harmful things.
yeah,
Because that's why there are bishops who sexually abuse children
Yep.
today,
yeah,
because the power of discernment isn't actually real and it doesn't actually work.
yeah.
So it's a harmful idea. It's harmful theology. It creates situations where people are abused and harmed.
Well, and it's important to clarify that, power of discernment is not just a thing that it's non-existent, therefore it has a null effect. No, it's non-existent and therefore deception increases.
Yes, absolutely.
And so it's
Not benign.
it's not an innocuous fantasy that Mormons, cling on to. It's a destructive fantasy that causes a lot of problems.
Absolutely. All you have to do is look at the number of scout leaders that abuse kids, or in a ward that I have been in the past, we had a young men's president that was arrested for sexually abusing a teenager.
Yeah.
We had a member of the bishopric who was sleeping with his secretary the whole time. His wife found out and filed for divorce. These are not, I mean, these are, if the power of discernment was real, those men never would have been in those positions.
Yeah. No, the famous case of the leader at one of the MTCs who had a literal sex dungeon somewhere in the building where he was sleeping with 19-year-old fresh-faced Mormon girls
And let's
who just
say
wanted to serve the Lord.
Yeah, that we're not going to say sleeping with. He was raping them.
He was raping them.
Yeah.
So
anyway, that is what I wanted to share with you and talk through with you. Something that I feel like there's some room for more investigation is And this is a level of tedious, almost like spreadsheet making, tracking kind of thing that I don't think I have the the mental bandwidth to engage
Mm,
in, but
mm,
somewhere my brain goes, if life was different and I had more time and I could focus on things like that more,
mhm.
somewhere my brain goes is like looking at the details, going back to Mary Smith and Edward Smith and really looking at all of their children and then all of their children's children and really looking to see how people died, when they died, if there
Yeah,
are those gaps in like a whole bunch of babies died in a row, looking at because this John Wooten Robinson, he looks like maybe had neurosyphilis and it
yeah,
it caused some insanity. Again,
mhm.
it's a supposition, but it feels very strong to me, like a
Yeah,
very strong chance
yeah,
that this is what we're looking at. What about his kids?
mhm.
Like I haven't, we haven't looked at his kids and really looking at any of Richard Smith Robinson's grandchildren. But that's a level of detailed tracking that I don't have the bandwidth for. But it's just, that's the type of thing where it would be really interesting to look at and kind of collect a little bit more of that
Mm,
information. I
mm.
think it would just solidify what we're already suspecting, though, that
Yeah,
this family, I think that the signs are there that this family had syphilis.
it looks that way. Yeah,
So,
yeah.
anyway,
I mean, this doesn't bring any, concrete conclusions, but it certainly adds substance to, the situation. I mean, it colors things. It does feel like a couple, a couple steps toward a more verified truth about what really happened.
yes, and a really important reason, I mean, yes, understanding the whole story and all of the truth, but one of the biggest reasons for me, because I I want the truth. I want what really happened. I
Yeah,
don't need to paint Richard worse than he
yeah.
is. And I have opinions about him already. I don't need to confirm my assumptions from before if I have new
Mm.
information. Like it's
Yeah,
really important to
yeah,
me. I have new information. Let's talk about the new
sure.
information. I want the opportunity to acknowledge that I may be wrong.
Yeah.
I may have made assumptions that were based on incomplete information. And now that I have more information, I view it differently. But
Hmm.
what's interesting is like I have more information that tells me that perhaps he was more honest on those records than I thought
Uh,
he was. But
yeah,
I also have more information that tells me that maybe Mary Ann was abused at home
yeah,
and I thought she was.
yeah,
And so it's like well, maybe her life was never mind, it was
yeah.
I
It's
thought it was.
clearer, but worse.
Yeah, because okay, real quick. You're right. It's clearer but worse because as horrific as it would be to be admitted to an asylum when there was no cause, it sounds like she was really suffering.
Yeah, she was just abused
Really suffering. Yes,
to a
abuse.
breaking point.
I mean, abuse, yes, but I'm talking about the neurosyphilis,
Oh yeah,
the breakdown of her cognition, the
yeah.
epilepsy, the if she did have dementia, if she
Hmm.
did get violent, but
Hmm.
I mean, it's violent not out of like hating people, it's out of
Right.
fear.
Yeah.
Like
Hmm.
it's a fear thing. It's not a I want to hurt people. So
Yeah.
just the confusion and the paranoia. It
Mm.
didn't mention anything about hallucinations, but Elizabeth's son looks like he was having hallucinations. So did
Yeah.
she also, who knows? We
Mhm.
don't know, but it the other day, or I guess it was almost a month ago now when we first recorded about Mary Ann. And I was saying things like she never had a chance. She never had a chance. Yes, but it's so much worse than I thought it was.
Yeah. Yeah.
It just
Yeah. Yeah.
I just feel sad.
Yeah, and it's not, I don't think that it is exaggeration to say that Mormon history is the history of women suffering. It's much, much easier to say that, I mean, human history is a history of suffering, but the Mormon men at least got some respite from suffering from time to time. How frequently did that happen with Mormon women? How frequently does that happen today with Mormon women? Yeah, I don't think you can answer that question honestly and have that be anything like an optimistic answer.
Nope. So yeah, so thank you for letting me spontaneously be like, can we please chat soon? Because I need to dump this on your
Yeah.
lap.
This was a kind of bombshell. All day I was wondering, like, okay, what is this going to be? Where's this going to go? And I can honestly say this is nothing at all like I thought it was going to be. So, no, as I often say with learning history, it's fascinating. It's even at times thrilling, but it's also awful and heartbreaking. And real history is that way.
Absolutely. And Mary Ann's life was indeed worse than we thought that it was. And it was already,
Yeah.
every day, already so hard. So I think for me, I'm just like, I'm carrying Mary Ann in my heart
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah.
I can't change anything that she
Mhm.
went through, but I can at least think about her.
My mind keeps going back to that simple description, always frail, never demanding. I just imagine this willowy little woman who just wanted some respite from her life of uncertainty and anxiety and never got it.
Never got it. She died at 62 years old, and I cannot think of a moment. I guess maybe I can find joy thinking about her hiding somewhere with her little cup of tea,
Yeah,
and that was her moment.
yeah. Her tragic little relief.
I think I need to go drink a cup of tea in her honor.
Yeah, seriously. Yeah.
All right. So, anyway, thank you for jumping on with me, and then we'll reconnect, soon and
Yeah,
talk
yeah.
about Richard but this is good information to have as we move forward and talk about Richard in Southern Utah because we already knew about Mary Ann, but I wanted this new information to be added to her story
Mhm.
before we continue talking about
Yeah.
Richard. You get into kind of like what their life was like in Southern
Mhm.
Utah.
Mhm.
So now we can go into it thinking they likely all had syphilis at the same time
Yeah,
too. And so it's just
yeah.
another layer of interesting
Yeah.
information that we can consider as we keep learning about him.
Hmm. All
So,
right.
all
All right.
right.
Well, I'm looking forward to it with dread. We'll pick up, yeah, as soon as you're ready.
Okay. Well, have a good afternoon and I'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Love you much.
Love you.
Bye-bye.